Welcome, everyone. My name is Patty Norris Lubold, and I am the Ward 6 School Committee member in Holyoke. And I am really pleased to bring you this programming today, or tonight, as it would be. So please welcome to Shifting the Narrative. Tonight is about helping the adults in our young people's lives, families, coaches, and caring community members better understand what is underneath big feelings and intense behavior in sports and at home, so that we can respond with support instead of shame. We are honored to welcome our featured speaker tonight, Courtney Edman, who brings deep experience in coaching executive function, self-regulation, and life skills, who helps adults see behavior as communication rather than character flaw. We are also grateful to our coaches who will be on a panel, Coach Rafael Santos Jr., Coach Finn Lubold, Coach David Guzman, and a special guest and a mom, Dorcas Rios. These are folks who work every day with students and with children who can share real stories and perspective and strategies about what young people need from the adults on the sideline and in their lives. Together, this conversation is about shifting the narrative from what's wrong with this kid to what happened and what do they need, and how can we show up differently so every young athlete feels seen, safe, and supported. We do have Spanish translation available, and there are headsets over there if you need to listen in Spanish, and I'm just going to read what I just read in English in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidas y bienvenidos a nuestro foro comunitario de Holyoke, cambiando la narrativa. Esta noche se trata de apoyar mejor a la juventud de nuestra comunidad, en casa y en el deporte, ayudando a las personas adultas en sus vidas a entender que hay detrás de las emociones fuertes y las conductas intensas para responder con acompañamiento en lugar de vergüenza o castigo. Es un honor contar nuestra ponente invitada Courtney Edman, quien tiene una amplia trayectoria en el entrenamiento de funciones ejecutivas, autorregulación y habilidades para la vida, y que nos invita a ver un comportamiento como una forma de comunicación y no como un defecto de carácter. También queremos agradecer a nuestro panel de entrenadores de Holyoke y una madre especial, el entrenador Finn Lubold, el entrenador David Guzman, el entrenador Rafael Santos Jr. y una madre, Dorcas Rios, quienes trabajan todos los días con nuestras estudiantes, atletas y hijos y compartirán historias y estrategias concretas sobre lo que necesitan de las personas adultas en la cancha y en las gradas. En conjunto, esta conversación busca cambiar la pregunta de ¿qué le pasa a este chico o chica? A que ha vivido, que necesita y cómo podemos responder de otra manera para que cada joven atleta se sienta visto, seguro y apoyado. So thank you, and now without further delay, let me welcome Courtney Edman.
I wish I could open with Spanish also. However, I speak French and German, but it's not going to do me any good tonight. But gracias for having me here. I should have learned that. So there's a lot of material that I have to cover in 20 minutes. So I'm not going to talk about myself, but I will give you a little bit of background that I had to shift my own narrative because of my second born, who's now 23, who I learned had learning differences. And the approach that I used with my girls on either side of him backfired, didn't work, and did all of the things that you're going to see happen when we use a traditional approach with kids whose brains work differently. We can't see it. They seem like they can follow the directions, should be able to do things. But when they don't, they won't. So, when I think about what our goal as parents, as teachers, as coaches, as adults in kids' lives, what are we hoping to do? I put the answers up here that I have, but I'm wondering, I'm open for this to be more of a conversation too, if you have other ideas. Ultimately, I think what we want to do is give them and guide them on the path to building skills and becoming as independent as they can be, right? We also want to have fun along the way, and we don't want to forget that. And sometimes, depending on their life stage, it can get in the way. We want to build confidence. We want them to have values and pass along our values. Is there anything that I didn't add that you might want to add? We want them to leave our house. Oh, we want them to become leaders. Sorry, my bad hearing. Yeah, we want them to become leaders. And sometimes it doesn't go as planned, but it can go south pretty quickly, unexpectedly, and we're left with, like, what am I doing wrong? Sometimes we assume that the problem is with me. Sometimes we assume it's with them. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen in the grocery store, it can happen at home, it can happen at school. And I'm so grateful for Rafael and Patty inviting me here to expand this conversation to beyond the school and the home. Because as adults who are coaches of our youth, we can have a massive impact in a place where kids feel confident about their abilities, especially if they're not feeling confident in school, right? So when it doesn't go as planned, we typically, like the traditional parent approach, the traditional response, is from this guy named B.F. Skinner, right? Who gave us positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, known as consequences, rewards, incentives. Right? So a lot of times we'll take kids' phones away, or if you don't do this, we'll use logic, we'll use reasoning, right? On the field, it might be, hey, if you're not going to shape up, you can either get out or you can do what I say. It's a very top-down approach, right? And it's informed by psychology. Like Dr. Skinner was transformative in his approach. What I'm here to say tonight is we have to shift the approach, and we can use those tools. It just can't be the only tool in our toolbox, and we have to use them in a different way. Because when it doesn't work, it's not going to work. And it's only going to make it worse for everybody, right? We're not going to get to those goals that I talked about. These, instead, are the outcomes. We get frustrated as adults with the kid. We get frustrated with, what do I do differently also? I can't figure this out. I'm a good problem solver. What's wrong with me? The kids get frustrated. And the behavior, what I'm hoping you can take away from tonight, at least one of the things, is when the kids start to do things that are unwanted, it's a frustration response. Kids who fight back, yeah, they have an unlucky frustration response because we get frustrated back. Kids who have a sad internal frustration response, it's a lucky response. And those are from Dr. Ross Green, right? Unlucky response, lucky response. We get compassionate when kids get sad, right? That's why it's lucky. But these frustration responses are fight, flight, freeze response. Does everybody know what that is? Right? So it's just like a reflexive brain response that keeps us safe. And if we keep trying this over and over and over again, we get the same response. So we see meltdowns, we see tantrums, right? We see getting aggressive, right? We also see people who just hide under the covers. That's a freeze response. And unfortunately, they're just trying to escape that feeling of not being able to meet an expectation, of doing what's expected. And I talk about escape because they want to change how they feel, and sometimes that response is substance abuse. Sometimes that response is self-injury. And substance abuse, self-injury, those are all under the umbrella of self-harm. And we don't want our kids to go down that path, right? That is not one of the goals we had. And so we can shift our response, and we can make an impact on the trajectory of their life by shifting the way that we perceive them. And I made this because, right, kids are not physically unsafe necessarily when we are using these logic and verbal communication approaches that have been approved by psychology, right? But what they see is they see the lion, tiger, and the bear coming at them. And so they have to put up their dukes, they have to run, they have to freeze and do something to protect themselves. So what we have to do is we have to not be the lion, tiger, or bear in order for their actions, their response to change. And that all comes down to understanding the brain. Because that fight, flight, freeze response is a primitive, reflexive, neurological, neurophysiological response for self-protection. We're not talking about that enough yet, that behavior, whether it's positive or, right, behavior can be intentional, and behavior can also be a reflexive protective response. Now, there are all kinds of factors that impact our actions, right? And this picture of the brain, I have a handout out here if anybody wants to take it with them. But if you look at, I have to be careful, I have to stay between the navigational lines, sorry. Let's see, I can do it over here. So if you can look at this picture, the circles, right? The circle number 1 is the emotional part of our brain, the emotional center of our brain, right? It's like, I have a good an audience in here that may know what I'm talking about when I say it's like Monopoly in the brain. You have to get past go to get to the rest. That emotional center is that you got to get past go, right? You cannot get to number 2, 3. I could argue that you could get to 4, the cerebellum, but you can't get to 2 and 3. And 2 is like the conductor of the brain, executive function skills, the frontal lobe. You can't get to 2 to help conduct the brain. And you can't get to 3, where all our knowledge and skills and communication abilities are, if you can't get through 1. So what happens when we go at somebody and say, get it together, why can't you do this? When we go at them, or we say, oh my gosh, I told you to brush your teeth. Why didn't you brush your teeth again? What's going on, right? You know how to do this. Number 1, shuts down. You're not gonna get them to be able to think about why they did it. They're protecting themselves. This happens no matter what their history is, right? But it's an exaggerated protective response if there are other factors happening. If someone already has a history of trauma, they're gonna have a heightened, exaggerated protective response. If someone's neurochemistry, right, the chemicals in their brain are different for some reason, their number 2, their executive function skills, may be limited. So the executive function skills, one of the functions that has is to help us understand when we're needing to protect ourselves and when it's not a true threat or danger. So if they're missing, or the neurophysiology of that chemistry is different, It's going to impact their ability to manage their own environmental threats and know what's real. Their processing speed, their emotions, their ability to take social cues in, all of these factors impact number one. I told you it was a lot I have to get through. So our perspective, right? Our perspective matters. And how many of these things can we see happening? I'll give you a clue. None of them, because they're all happening within the brain. We have a hard time measuring it. We have a hard time seeing it unless we're getting an MRI. So for someone who has high verbal skills and you can have a conversation with and they seem to have all this knowledge, we don't know what's going on in here. We don't know what they're understanding. The only way we know is through their actions. So our perspective of their actions matters because it informs our response. What's interesting is in our society, when we see somebody who has a difference that impacts their motor output, their movement, Parkinson's, a stroke, someone in a wheelchair, we typically have more of a compassionate response, and we perceive them, oh, they can't go up the stairs. Oh, they can't do this, right? We offer help, I hope. We're getting there at least anyway, for the most part. What happens when we see somebody with a behavioral challenge or who's doing something and it doesn't impact, we don't see an impact on their motor skills, right? They walk, they run, they go up and down stairs, they get up and down off the floor, but they have difficulty following directions. We perceive that as they won't. But what we're not knowing is that the same pathways that impact those motor outputs in Parkinson's and a stroke, they're impacted in these people that have brain differences. But our perception is different. And because we see them as they won't, we see it as behavioral because that's what we've been trained to see it as. We just have to shift the narrative. Because the truth of the matter is, they can't. And the reason that they can't is things that we can't see. So this iceberg shows the behaviors happening that we're visibly seeing, but what's really happening underneath are the things that are contributing to their inability to do and take action on what we want them to do. And we have to get curious. We have to shift our narrative and say, what's going on underneath the surface for this kid? The kids are having a hard time. They're not giving us a hard time. Again, Dr. Ross Green, right? Not my words, his. So our perspective matters because if we see that they can't and they're having a hard time, we're going to go up to them and say, hey, how can I help you? I see you're having a hard time. What's going on? And we're going to offer this compassionate, curious response. So this is a picture of Dr. Ross Green. Aren't you happy I gave you a picture finally? So he talks about kids do well when they can, right? And that's a wonderful phrase. Kids do well when they can. They're having a hard time, not giving us a hard time. And that can help us manage our response because we have to manage our response first. And so I love this slide that says, am I using my nervous system? Because if I'm having a frustration response, that's just my fight, flight, freeze. Like, come on, do what you can, right? That's my nervous system. If I'm having a fight, flight, freeze response, I'm not using my nervous system to support the other person's nervous system. And kids with these invisible brain-based differences, they've got radar for nervous systems that are not regulated. They know. And if they aren't talking to you, they don't feel safe. If they're having a fight, flight, freeze response, they know. They know I can't trust this person yet, right? because we have the capacity to change in the same way that our kids have the capacity to change. So we have to prioritize our response and shift our response first. We have to breathe, right? A longer exhale than an inhale triggers the opposite of our sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight-flight one, and helps us calm down. The parasympathetic nervous system is the calming one. So we can exhale longer than our inhale. So like, count to 3 on the inhale, 5 on the exhale. It's an autonomic response, automatic response. We can respond instead of react. So we can respond and be assertive without attacking or without making them feel attacked. With our tone of voice, with our body language. We prioritize connection first, right? We have to think, there's a great, Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson wrote a great book, The Whole Brain Child, and they talk about connect, then direct, right? We can't use logic and reasoning if that emotional part 1 of our brain is shut down. Can't access it. And we have to use our oars, right? Because when we use our oars to communicate, that prioritizes connection first. It allows for compassion, for curiosity to show up first. And we can get to the underlying, under the surface understandings, the roots of what's going on for that kid that's showing up as actions and having a hard time. So what are the oars, right? It's a motivational interviewing term for behavioral change. And so it's using open-ended questions. What, when, where, how. We don't use why, because that automatically triggers for so many kids the protective response. It's also pretty abstract for a lot of kids, but the what, when, where, how are very concrete, practical ways of thinking that kids can access more easily. We affirm them. If someone says, if you say, hey, what's going on? I'm having a hard time. Well, I just don't feel, like this is really boring, right? Or I don't know. You can respond with, well, you think this is really boring. Repeat what they say. They want to feel heard. Sometimes we respond and we say, it's not boring, this is really fun. We think we're helping, it's not malintent. But the kids want to feel heard in the same way that we want to feel heard. We don't go to our friends and we say, gosh, I'm really bored. And they're like, no, it's not. Come on, this is fun, right? But that's an adult to adult. That's a different thing, that you feel safe with your friend or partner, right? Like, the kids want to feel validated for their experience, which is real for them. And we don't have to try to dismiss it or be afraid of it. You have to shift our internal narrative. We don't have to force them to think the way we think. We have to understand what they're thinking. So affirmations, reflective listening, it's very similar. It's repeating back what they're saying. Reflective listening is a little bit more seeking to make sure you understand what they say. And then summarize, setting boundaries. So in true oars, S is summarizing. But sometimes as an adult, we need our kids to do something, right? We have to get them to like, dude, I know you don't want to brush your teeth, and it's important for heart health, it's important for your teeth health, like we can give them all the reasons. Don't use the word but, because guess what? They're going to feel turned out when you use the word but. And two things can be true at the same time. Our kids' experience and our expectation can live simultaneously together. And when we use the word and, that means they both can be true at the same time. When we use the word but, their experience can feel dismissed. If we use the word and, both can be true. And then you say, sometimes it's the toothpaste is like, I don't like the taste of the toothpaste. Okay, you don't like the taste of the toothpaste. And we still have to get your teeth brushed. What do you think we're going to do about it? What are your ideas? Get their voice involved, ask an open-ended question, right? How can we solve that? How can we make this happen? Here are some ideas for ways you can respond in an open-ended way, right? It is hard to learn to do this, right? I made the shift my son was 17. He's now 23. I do this on a daily basis when I coach clients. I'm an expert at asking these questions. I can do it pretty quickly. It took me a long time to get there. So when you're trying to make that shift, be gracious with yourself, right? It takes a while. And it's hard. It takes a lot of cognitive effort. It's exhausting. And I also have a handout that has a number of these, all about oars over here, if you guys want to take them. And we can probably get PDFs to you if you want them digitally. So I thought I would bring in some real life examples of people who either use this approach already or have shifted their approach. So, okay, Gino Oriyama did something recently that I don't agree with, and he really had a high frustration response with another adult, right? However, I read this about him, that he had to shift his approach with the girls that he coaches at UConn women's basketball team, because he learned that when he went at his girls and trying to demand more and more and more, in his words, he said, I was just adding fuel to the fire with more gasoline. And it didn't work. So he had to shift his approach to be more calm. It's neurophysiological, right? It makes sense when you understand the brain. Tony Dungy, also a well-known football coach, right? This is a quote from him. He prioritizes the relationship, the connection, and he never yells at a person. I think his quote speaks for himself. When they have confidence in me, when they trust me, I can work with them and get them to do the skills that I'm asking them to do. And then Corey Close, who recently won the women's basketball Division I championship with, her girls on the team won, and she was the coach. She also uses this same, I call it a compassionate curiosity approach, right? Because we have to make a connection. We have to offer kindness, and then we have to get curious. Sounds easy. It's a lot harder in practice when we're managing our frustration response, right? But it's possible. So bottom-up strategies. The reason I call them bottom-up strategies is because we're coming from the bottom of the iceberg in the water to make an impact on the things below the surface that we can't see, rather than the top-down strategies trying to extinguish the behaviors. Does that make sense? So we're trying to figure out what are these bottom-up strategies. That's a term used by Mona Delahook in her book called Beyond Behaviors. So these are all examples, but the important thing is we have to individualize it, right? We have to be partners in problem solving, and we invite their voice because they are the experts in themselves. So when we can get to know what they understand about themselves, what their experience is, we invite their voice instead of trying to tell them what our solution is. We get individualized responses. So the toolbox is always expanding. I don't have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers. You can be partners in problem solving with your students, with your kids, and you can have fun with it because you don't have to have all the answers. It's really freeing, right? And it's a great way to bond with the kids. So I have some examples here. But otherwise, the takeaways are, and I know that we're going to have some more examples, right? That behavior is neurological, neurophysiological, however you want to talk about it, neurochemical. It's not willful. Okay, yes, there are times when behavior is willful, right? Intentional. But when we can see it from a different lens, are they doing this on purpose? The approach can be the same, right? When we want to shift what they're doing, compassionate curiosity wins all the time. Even if they don't have a learning difference, right? We're going to still value their input. Safe, trusting relationships are essential with adults instead of having this hierarchical thing. Let's see ourselves as partners. I just have more experience and knowledge. So I know how we're going to get there faster, safer. but your experience matters. So let's talk. Get curious. Please don't use why as a trigger word for them, and use bottom-up strategies. You'll create lasting change for these kids and impact their trajectory in life. And as I always like to say, help them share their gifts with the world, right? Because ultimately, that's one of the things that we want to do also. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Courtney. So now I'd like to invite our panel up to their seats so that we can deepen the conversation with some real experiences and that people have had on the panel. So I know that I introduced you in the beginning, but I would just love for you, if we could start with Dorcas, just to just say a little bit about who you are, and we'll just go around just to orient the room.
Good evening. My name is Dorcas. I am born and raised in Holyoke. I work in Holyoke. I went to school in Holyoke. Everything in this city is what I do. I'm a mom of a former athlete who used athlete as leisure activity. He's 13 years old, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm thankful for Courtney. I'm an auditory learner, so I went through the information when you sent it, but when you were sharing it, it was very, very good. It clicked some things for me, so thank you so much.
My name's David Guzman. I've been coaching baseball and football at the high school since 2008, so looking at 18 years now. I'm happy to be here and discuss our experiences and to learn. So,
my name is Rafael Santos Jr. I'm a Holyoke High School graduate, student athlete at the University of Massachusetts, former athlete. Work for the House of Corrections. I've been coaching and involved with youth for over 20 years, and really am passionate of learning more of how I can use best practices when I'm working with our youth population.
Hi, my name is Finn Lubold. Born and raised Holyoke. Only time I left the nest was for college for 4 years. Proud 2019 Holyoke High alum. Graduated Franklin Pierce University in 23. I currently work at Holyoke High School. I have been there for 3.5 years. And during that time, I have coached football and indoor and outdoor track. I really enjoy working with our kids in Holyoke. I love teaching them all day long from 8 in the morning till 6 at night with coaching. And I'm very excited to hear everybody's perspectives on this panel.
So beyond what I shared with you earlier, I also am a lifelong athlete. I still compete as a tennis player, and I started the women's basketball team at the university where I went down in Virginia a long time ago. And I also played basketball from the time I could walk all the way through the time I had kids.
Thank you. And yes, I am related to Finn, but I'm super excited as a mom to be on a panel with him. But also, I would say, as a former college athlete myself, as a swimmer, I could master the dedication and coaching and things of that nature, or showing up for practice in swimming. But when I tried to play other sports, I was the student athlete in field hockey that gave up, that quit. That I regret quitting now as an adult, I will say. But if I had somebody who maybe gave some of the responses like that, I think it would have been different. But so it really touched me when you were talking about that. So I want to start by grounding us with a hook, what we call in journalism a hook question. And that hook question I'm going to throw over to Rafael first, because I know we've talked before. So I want you to share a story about a student athlete that you almost gave up on, or a moment when you thought that you had lost them. You don't have to name names, but tell us what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so that was a pretty challenging moment because the expectation for this student athlete coming into a new season, my expectations knowing him from the previous season was that he was going to elevate to a certain standard that he was set for himself based on his character and attitude that was really positive. the prior year, and then coming into the next year, it just wasn't the same student that I knew from the previous year. And asking them to follow instructions or get with it, come to practice on time, be prepared, execute the play, get off your stance. I felt like we always constantly had to ask him for this, and he just would check out and give some negative feedback back to coach. Was pretty responsive or reactive towards me. And I just thought we lost the kid. He's not going to, do as what we would like him to do, and is not interested. But it took some work, and, I don't think I always used the best approach. Well, I'm not going to say anything. I did not. I'm here to also, be honest with myself and know that there are things that I can do a little bit differently. So I don't add the gas to the fire that's already ignited. So I think the outcome at the end of the season came out to be pretty positive. And I think all the coaches would agree that it was a good turnout.
Was there a moment when you got interrupted that that made you stop and change behavior? Did someone interrupt you?
Oh, yeah, that's right. The guy to my right, who was a little younger than me, stopped me in my tracks, and I was taken aback by it because, I have a lot of respect for the coaches I work with. And it just took that moment. He said, "Hey, coach, maybe we can deal with it later on." And that was it. At that point, we just let it go and move on to the next play, next practice, and go from there instead of harping on something that's already happened and beyond my control.
Finn, what was going through your mind at that moment when you had to say something to a colleague?
Our coaching staff, we're really close. We've bonded outside of just practices. We have strong relationships. And I could just tell that Coach Rafael he was at his cap for the day. Especially this is a kid we've been trying to build all season and get past this little hump. And we couldn't. This was universal. This is a struggle that all of us were getting. And I just thought I saw two Rams about to butt heads in a sense, that both people were at a cap, and we just had to give it time, give it space, and go from there.
So you knew that there was a de-escalation process and that there was a different way to handle it.
Yeah, giving it time so we could have more time to think and process and handle it at a later time. And
do you feel that moment was pivotal in helping someone change that directory or how that student athlete maybe responded to you later?
I mean, in the sense of production, the student athlete went ahead and kept moving and had some successful moments in games. And I would say as a staff, being in the coach's office later and talking about it in pre-practice the next day on just ways to handle. So I guess there were wins on both sides, yeah.
And would you add to that, Rafael?
Yeah, I saw a lot of growth in him after the fact. And, he can appreciate, we've had our conversation. My response to the situation was just get out of here. If you don't want to be here, there's the door. We don't have time for this type of behavior. And it was infectious. Like, we were all impacted by it. But he took ownership, and I took ownership, and we moved on. And his attitude changed, So I did see, some positives out of that.
So, David, I know that you've coached with Rafael and Finn, but just curious, as you've witnessed these types of situations, if you can share, where a shift happened for you, what changed, maybe not with the same particular athlete, but what was something that happened to you that really opened your eyes that you might need to shift your behavior as a coach when dealing with different athletes?
Yeah. Well, early on in my coaching career, I was 100 miles an hour, and I'm coaching you hard, no matter who you are. I coach everyone the same. I'm coaching you at 100 miles an hour, really hard. And I had this one particular kid who was really talented, physical kid, and he was having trouble understanding the offensive plays. And the way we call our offense is everyone has a risk coach, and all our plays are on the risk coach. And then we call a number, and they look for the number and read the play. And this particular individual was having trouble understanding what we were asking him to do. And this went on for, the preseason, and I really started to get frustrated. And, in football, I have my own internal rule where I can't play you if you don't know what you're doing, because there's 10 other kids out there and somebody can get hurt. This is a physical game. So if you don't know what you're doing, you may put somebody else at risk. So, as time went on, I'm starting to think I may not be able to use this kid on offense. And then one day, I had a conversation stirred up with one of his parents, and it came up, and I learned that he didn't learn like the other kids learned. He didn't see the words like the other kids saw the words. And football, the way we do it, it's fast-paced. We yell something. It's no huddle. You have to look, and in 3 seconds, you got to know what you're doing, and you're down in your stance. And when it's chaotic like that, it's very hard for kids with learning disabilities to focus and really understand what's going on. And that was the first time I realized that I can't coach every kid the same way. So we came up, with a strategy. First off, I felt, the first thing I felt was, what am I doing? Why am I getting on this kid? I had no idea. I had never dealt with anybody with a learning disability. I didn't know what to look for. And it made me realize I can't coach every kid the same way. So we formulated a plan on how to get this kid to understand, what to do on every play. And it turned out, at the end of it all, he was a great player for us. He went on to play in college. He's doing great now, so really proud of him.
Thank you so much. I noticed, Dorcas, as you were listening, as a mom, and you hear that, because when we're parents and we're going and we're entrusting, our students and our kids to coaches, it might feel comfortable, it might not feel comfortable to share what's happening for our children from a learning disability lens or a behavioral lens. And what has been your experience as you've worked with your son trying different athletic opportunities?
So before I answer the question, I do want to let people know my son knows that I'm here. He knows what we're talking about. I did tell him, I said, your name may come up or our family experience may come up, so don't be surprised, so that he wouldn't feel weird about it. But my son, he really truly isn't a sports kid. He wanted to try track and field. He did good, but he's more on the art side. And my experience with Caleb Ezra being on the field of track and field, my understanding from his words, not mine, is, I just want to go build my skill. And I remember telling him, I was like, but the idea is to race. The idea is to run, and, you're going to be competing against other people. And he says, well, I don't really want to do that. I just want to go build my skill and see what it's like to run on the track, see how much I can do. And I said, oh, okay, and I didn't realize going in that that's always an option. Leisure sports isn't always an option. Their competitiveness is there, and that helps kids to grow. And the coaches have that influence. But you also have a group of kids that just want to have fun, and that was where my kid sat, and I was willing to support that as long as we could. He enjoyed it, for the time that he did. And I noticed that aside from him, he's my only one. I'm a, single not a single mom, but he's my only child. There were a lot of kids out there that you can kind of look out and know that they weren't necessarily great at the sport, but they enjoyed just kind of being with other kids and having fun. And that was the concept that he had from the get.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's instructive that not everybody wants to stay on the field or stay in the field in the same way. And so I think that gets at, for the coaches on the team to kind of think about, what is that need that you were talking about? What is the main motivation to be here, and what do they need, right, in order to be successful? From a behavior perspective, though, and I was wondering, because a lot of times, and when Courtney was talking about her slides mentioned, sometimes it can look like someone's having an attitude, or they're being defiant, or they're deliberately not following directions that you've given them. And our first instinct, to your point, Courtney, was that we don't always think they didn't understand me, because they might be going like this because they want to please, and then they go right when you told them to go left. And this is to anybody, has there ever been a moment like that for you where you might have thought to be like, hey, you're not following directions, or why are you, saying that? And then realize later that the athlete really didn't understand the directions, and it wasn't a willful situation. It was that they just really didn't understand and didn't know how to tell you. Has that come up for any of you in your relationships?
Yeah. I remember we had a kid who was difficult all year with all the coaches. And it comes to the end of the year, and we have a end of the year ceremony for the seniors. And mind you, all year, this kid has had an issue with every single coach on the team. And we have at the end of the year, we have a senior ceremony where we let the seniors talk to the team. And when this particular kid came up, regardless that we had issues all year, he was preaching to the kids everything that we were preaching to him throughout the year. So we may have thought it was going in one ear and out the other. He doesn't care. He doesn't this. He doesn't that. But deep down, he was listening to us. All right. And at the end of it all of us coaches looked at each other and we're like, he understood us the whole day, the whole time, all year. He understood what we were trying to get him. And we were just proud of him. It was just showed so much growth to get from where he was during the year to at the end of the year, preaching to the kids what the coaches have preached to him all year. So, it was awesome to see that.
I just want to piggyback on that a little bit, because I think it gets to the heart of kids want to do well. And in the moment with each of the coaches throughout the year, for whatever reason, he was having a hard time in the moment with his response. However, he was hearing what you were saying. It was making a difference, and you were making a difference, even though in the moment he was having a hard time. He wanted to do well, and you had an impact.
Yeah.
I think, it's important to note that even though we were having challenges with this individual, we still poured our hearts into him. This was just a challenging situation, and it wouldn't be like typical of us to just ignore it, dismiss it. It was challenging. And but we always poured our hearts into him after a situation, after practice, checking ins, all those things. And I think he valued that. And there was one incident where he did go right when I asked him to go left. He missed I'm like, dude, what is going on? He goes, Coach, I can't hear you. Well, if you don't tell me that you have something going on, I'm assuming you're hearing the play or you're hearing the call. No, you got to be a little louder. Okay, that's an easy fix. But it's 6 weeks into the season. and now, that's where the battle kind of got fueled. You're not listening. Well, I'm having a hard time hearing. Okay, we can get past that.
And I think in a hierarchical relationship, I mean, when we have to advocate for ourselves as adults, I know sometimes I get nervous when I have to make a phone call, right, for myself. And if we have this hierarchical relationship between kids, parents, kids, teachers, kids, coaches, that can be a scary place for a kid to tell someone they didn't get what was said, or they need something repeated. And we don't know what their experience has been when they've asked for help before. And so previous experiences can inform future actions, and so they might be afraid. So sometimes it might be helpful as coaches to say, all right, what did I say, guys? Or as teachers, to check for, and to do a check-in about what they heard.
Yeah, those are really great points, and I also want to mention with Dorcas what you were saying about overtly telling your son about what you were coming to do, what you were coming to talk about, and what that meant. And I also am cognizant of the fact that the three of the coaches were also athletes, and you grew up in a system in a time when there wasn't this thoughtful or stop moment, if you will, to say, hey, what's really going on here? There wasn't that. And I just wonder now, and I think about Courtney's slide about things that you can do, what do you try to do to pace yourself on the field now that you know that it's possible that what's really happening is not what you initially might think?
I think I recognize the clues better now, to try to understand what's bothering or what the issue is with the particular individual. Where earlier on, I didn't have the experience of working with kids like that, so I didn't know what to look for. And speaking with parents who have, kids with learning disabilities, I now understand what to look for. And I use the coaches, we're a team, we strategize together on how we deal with certain kids, to try and give them the best experience. That's basically our goal. Our goal is to give these kids, the best experience, high school football experience possible, with us teaching them life skills. Simple things like don't be late, which is one of my huge rules. I don't like when kids are late, because when you grow up and you have a job, they're not going to allow you to be late. So I really think that I've learned what to look for, and not saying that I know everything, because a lot of times I still don't know. This is not what I do as a profession. But I'm not afraid to ask. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Rafael, how about you?
I just assume that there's something going on 100% of our kids that we're engaging with. We live in a toxic environment. We are on fight or flight mode 24 hours a day, teachers, parents, student athletes. It's a dysfunctional society with everything that we're dealing with. So I see some of the struggles, and I look for those cues, and I just do check-ins, and and if I see something, I just ask random questions. What's going on? How you doing? How was that? Just my personality, my approach, and acknowledge the things they do well, but be direct and be able to point out the things that they don't do so well, and then just try to navigate how they can do better. I mean, we went from a team that will battle any team at any fight for any reason. Our scoreboard and our win and loss columns, they don't show winning seasons right now. But when our kids this past season did not react, they responded to a situation and did not engage in a physical altercation and looked at us with smiles on their face, that's a win. We won. I don't care what the scoreboard says. I don't care what anybody has to say about our wins and losses. We won. our kids, our Holyoke kids, who reputations get tainted by, our behaviors on the field and courts, responded to the situation. We looked at each other like, this is awesome. Throw your hands up, look at us, and we're on this side of the conversation. So sometimes you don't see the progress that's being made with those small interactions, those check-ins, and those kids feeling valued by us. And, we don't get it right all the time, of course not, but we're learning.
Yeah. Finn, how about you?
Well, just to add on to all that, I think the best part of all of that is the culture shifted, and it was because we always kept steady with our high expectations. That just because we have high expectations doesn't mean we have to plow onto kids and make them think that they can reach the stars, when we can just step by step get them to where they need to be and build that culture that isn't fighting for whatever reason. That we're building something bigger than that. We're trying to give kids skills to be on time, advocate for themselves, communicate with each other in a respectful manner, and just develop them as young men and women.
And do you have an example, though, of how you might jump into that conversation? Before I get to audience questions, I just would be curious. So, like, if you are trying to teach that respect, or you hear disrespect, how do you change the narrative in that moment?
To me, my go-to is always like a one-to-one conversation. I can recall back a couple years ago, we had an athlete, and I wasn't, like, I was coaching him up, I was giving him a tip, but I was also complimenting him. But he was across the field, I was using my loud coach voice that might have came off aggressive. And he started just arguing back with me, and I was taken away by it. So I just went to him, I was like, what's up? He's like, why are you yelling at me? And I was like, I was 50 yards away from you, and just that realization. And then from that point, I tried to get with him personally, or if we were in a game, maybe tell another kid to give that direction who was in a closer vicinity. So just knowing that, I guess, building those relationships over time and understanding how people react.
Yeah, that's perfect. Go ahead.
One thing that I would like to piggyback on that with is that I always like to say, from relationships, skills can be built. And I think what you all just shared is an example of that, right? And when there's this safety in relationship, kids aren't afraid to speak their truth. So when Finn went to say, hey, what's up? The player was able to say, you yelled at me, without fear. And that's huge, because when kids can have that awareness of what is happening for them and can self-advocate and share it without fear, that changes everything for that kid. And it's a really cool moment that you share. Thank you.
So I want to open it up for the community and the audience, just if there are questions. And there's a microphone that you can stand here, or I can give you the handheld, whatever feels comfortable. But I would love if anything that was said tonight, either in Courtney's presentation, if you have a specific question for her, or any of the panelists, in terms of what they see with the student athletes on the field, I think they would be open to that.
Is this on? Here, I'll take that one. First off, thanks for having us this evening. I feel it's long overdue. Nobody gives you the playbook as a coach, whether you're at the youth level or the high school level, and how to work with kids, especially neurodivergent children. In Holyoke, we have a lot of that. And my question is maybe for Courtney or anyone. When I used to coach, I would love it when a parent would tell me, hey, my kid's on the spectrum of autism or whatever else it may be. But that's really the minority. And I hear from some of the coaches here or some other folks that, there's a stigma that parents don't want to relay that, hey, my kid's dyslexic or has ADHD. And, you know, to tame the shame in you know, your business, I feel that goes to parents as well. I don't think there's shame. It's really about the benefit of your child, right? Is there anything you might be able to say or share that can open up maybe parents to being more open about, you know, a kid's learning disability?
Thank you for asking that question. I think that it's a personal journey when we are understanding our kids' learning differences, our brain-based differences, and it's a journey whether there's a physical element that is impacted or in kind of a learning or mental process that's impacted. And in my opinion, this approach can be used and be successful with someone regardless of a diagnosis. The thing that's going to impact is the strategy that we use, right? And so if a parent is having a hard time sharing a diagnosis or for some reason doesn't want to, they can talk about that, what their reasons are with someone. I encourage them to talk with someone about their reasons for being afraid to share that information, because it can be really helpful as a teacher or as a coach to understand the strategies that will be most effective. However, what we can do is we can use our observations as people, as coaches, as teachers, and go to the parent and say, hey, I notice your child's having a hard time doing what the plays are telling him to do. And the parent can then be like, well, how are you telling him to do it? Oh, well, we use the wrist coach and he has to read the play, which could be helpful for the parent to be like, well, he doesn't know how to read. Oh, okay. But if the parent's not willing to share, so the parent doesn't have to share the diagnosis. They just have to share what the skill is and the reason, so that okay, well, how do we help him know what to do? And then you can be partners in problem solving to develop a strategy. If a parent's not, so we can initiate that conversation by using the language around he's having a hard time instead of, hey, he's not listening to me, right? Or he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing and it's really frustrating. So if we can shift our response to be curious to the parent, then the parent's more than likely not going to have a frustration or fear response as well. So it's all about approaching it with curiosity, like, gosh, what's going on? And it doesn't, so like, I think that sharing diagnosis can be helpful because it informs strategies in the most effective way, but I don't think that it's imperative when you're not working with insurance-based things or talking about financial-based things, because the diagnosis is really helping inform treatment rather than, and can impact payment forms, right? But it's really about how do we give them the skills and the tools. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Ben, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to add to that part, especially with all the talk about risk coaches and playbooks. As a special education teacher, IEPs are that playbook. Like she said, the diagnosis doesn't need to be known, but on that document, there are several accommodations that will support your kids' specific needs. And if those are shared alone, I mean, that will go a long way for the child's success.
And just to add on that, I had experience when one of my children was in school with their IEP, and there were some behavior challenges that were happening in the classroom. And I had known Courtney, and I had read some of her materials, and that technique of getting curious. And so when I got the phone call home, I said, okay, well, can you help me understand what's going on in the classroom? What are you teaching at that time that we're noticing that, you know, the pencil is flying off the deck and the shoe's coming off the foot? You know, what's going on? And it turned out that the particular teacher where there was not support in the classroom. A math teacher was doing word problems, and my son is dyslexic. And so that behavior was commensurate with what he was experiencing with his learning disability, not knowing how to act in that particular classroom because he didn't have the supports. And so that was an opportunity for us to have deeper conversations in the school to say, hey, I think, when you're doing word problems or something in math, we might need to have some other assistance there. So again, finding that calm and asking and being curious is really a really important tip, both not just on the field or with your child in general, but also when you're speaking with teachers or paraprofessionals in the school to really get at what might be happening for them. Mm-hmm.
So I think that as parents, like on both sides, whether it's teaching, coaching, or parenting, we need to keep in mind that whatever activity our kids are doing, whether it's a sports, whether it's an after-school program, a club, music, parents are signing off. They're giving permission, and oftentimes they're signing off on waivers. And so when they're signing their child to you for that amount of time, there should be that agreement or that understanding that those curious questions are going to come up when something comes up that a child does, is reacting or is having a situation. Like Guzman was saying, that he asked questions to a parent, what is going on here? You know what I mean? Because kids will continue to show up. Rafael was saying, we poured into this kid, this kid who's having trouble like every single day, every single year, but that kid was still showing up every single day and every single year, and he didn't have to. He could have chosen to walk off on his own. His parent could have chosen to pull him. But it was signed off, and wherever your signature is, then the parent should be there as well, in some way, shape, or form, providing whatever kind of information to help guide, and being that advocate for your kid. My son, he's 13, he's on the spectrum, and he's a really good advocate for himself. But I think that the first time that my son realized that I was on his side, even though there were times that I couldn't figure out what was going on, there was a situation that it wasn't sports related, but this is one of those conversations that even though we're talking to coaches, it applies across the board with anything. So if you're watching, keep that in mind, okay? It's important to know. But I remember that he was having a situation in school, and one of the things that I've always told the teachers, they know me, is like, if you call me right now and you tell me something's going on, I got time in my time bank, I gotta go, I gotta head to school, something's up. And I show up, and we went into the office, and the principal was explaining what happened. And I remember I told my son, I said, we're gonna walk in, just keep in mind when someone else is speaking, you just wait, listen, I'm gonna wait alongside you, let them say what they gotta say, and we be respectful. When it's your turn, you're gonna be able to say your side. And my son trusts that what I'm telling him is what it is. And the teacher went ahead and, the principal was saying what was going on and stuff like that. And I said, okay, so Ezra, what happened? He says, well, this happened. And right mid-sentence, she went to jump in. And I stopped and I was like, excuse me, I don't recall my son interrupting you. He's in the middle of a sentence. Do you mind waiting? And she was like, oh. And I was like, go on. And he almost had to breathe 2 times because he didn't realize that, my mom stopped the space so I can finish. And he looked at me, I was like, Daddy. And he said his point, we got to an agreement, but this is a partnership. You're signing off for your kids to participate. It's important to be willing to share, not necessarily diagnosis, how Courtney was explaining, but being that available parent to give input, to give access, and then back off and let them do their thing, let the coaches do their job, and then come in and say, and the coaches the same way. Because at the end of the day, you have information that the coaches just simply don't know. And kids will behave differently somewhere else than they behave in your house. The structure is different. So there's things that happen that that even if you tell them, until they see it, at least they got that hint, and that's really helpful.
Sometimes they talk about writing letters to teachers, especially in elementary school, but it can happen throughout, to say, my child does best when, right? And I think that could be helpful for coaches also, right? My child does well when this is happening. Or if they're having a hard time, if they're not doing what you're asked, sometimes this can be helpful. So as the parent who knows the child, when you can share that information, that they do well, they don't do well with this, if they're having a hard time, you can try this. Sharing that objective information doesn't require a diagnosis to be shared. Because a diagnosis can show up in so many different ways for so many different people. And it's really a diagnosis that, right, you meet certain criteria, but it can show up in so many different ways for different kids. And in different environments, it can show up in different ways.
But I love that. I want to just repeat that you can ask an overt question or have it in a questionnaire that says, my child does best when. And that's giving information without maybe oversharing or at risk of that private information that can sometimes get in the way for people.
It's good for anybody, right? You don't have to have a diagnosis to know when you do well or when you have a hard time, because everybody has, strengths and struggles.
And I think, what's important is for the coach is to view that information when it's provided from a parent. You'll hear a coach or somebody say, well, they're just coddling their kids. This is not coddling. You have to, you can't view it that way, because now you just dismiss the parent concerned who doesn't want to disclose it, because are they going to hear me? Like, my aunt's not playing. She will step up to the plate. And I love it. I'm proud of her. She's like many mothers that will step, that's their, it's not coddling. And we need that information. I think we're quick to jump to that assumption because there's a parent in my zone as a coach. And, you have to be open-minded and be, especially at an earlier age. We're not paying these athletes to play. The expectation is a little bit different. It's not coddling. It's understanding and dealing with the situation appropriately.
Thank you all for being here. Very good information. And I commend the love that you give kids. My question is, so you all are in the high school coaching sphere. Do you have a specific training that you offer your coaches for your level and also the younger levels?
There is really no training that we offer. Luckily, we have a staff that has been together for a while, and we've learned together through our experiences with handling different kids. So we've learned through experiences. So there isn't a formal class that we take or we give or that the high school gives or that the MIA gives. Really, our learning comes from experience.
And, there's nothing formal in place, but we have been intentional about getting together. And, you might have read about Project Renovate and its intentions behind it. And it's to offer opportunities for coaches to be better mentors and leaders and lead by example. There's a lot that we want out of our kids, but, the kids don't do a good job listening. They do a good job imitating adults. That's the James Baldwin quote. I won't take credit for that. But, there has to be a level of continuity for as early as possible throughout high school and beyond, that we're coaching and we're modeling the right behavior. And there's resources out there. So we really can't say that there isn't. There is. There's tons of resources on how to address things appropriately when you're a coach and you're a mentor. And there's a lot of resources for parents to access as well. So we just have to be better at tapping into those resources and being trained and being intentional and build up as a community.
And then just to add to our communication as a group, and we even have a direct line with Holyoke Youth, our partnership, and probably most of us went through Holyoke Youth football. So just overall communication, and I think the men that we have at the table on our staff aren't afraid to be called out. And when we are, we have those helpful discussions to improve our own coaching together.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Sorry. Well, thank you Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Courtney, and thank you for the panel. I know we're a little bit over time, but I appreciated your ability and your time to share your stories and to give this insight for our parents who are watching at home. It's been really instructive. There are some materials over on the table in addition to some water and some snacks if you want to grab some on your way out. But again, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.